The recent terror attacks on Bourbon Street in New Orleans and the Trump Hotel in Las Vegas have shaken our country. We've been left wondering, how do we prevent this? How do we stop it? Many seek political answers focused on prevention, and that's definitely worth exploring, but one thing's for certain: we won't have solutions anytime soon. In the meantime, what's the individual actions we can take in the moment? What can we do if thrust into the chaos of a terrorist attack? In today's show, we delve into the relevant self-defense law and explore what actions you can legally take to protect yourself and others if caught in this nightmare scenario. I am, of course, attorney Andrew Branca for Law of Self-Defense, and for those of you who stay to the end, I'll share with you how you can get a free copy of our best-selling book, The Law of Self-Defense Principles, your handbook to being hard to convict if you're ever compelled to use force in defense of yourself, your family, or your property. With the new year, America has seen at least 2 terrorist attacks take place. The first was the New Year's Eve truck attack on Bourbon Street in New Orleans by Shamsuddin Jabbar, 42. Jabbar used a pickup truck to plow through the celebrating crowd, then exited his vehicle with a rifle and exchanged gunfire with police who shot him dead. Jabbar had also apparently prepared a number of explosive devices, none of which were detonated. 14 people were killed and dozens wounded. This was followed only hours later when a cyber truck rented by one Matthew Livelsberger, 37, exploded outside the Trump Hotel in Las Vegas. This time only one was killed, apparently Livelsberger himself, with another 7 wounded. The Cybertruck seems to have prevented much worse consequences by actually funneling the blast up through the vehicle's roof. It's notable that the glass in the Trump Hotel's front doors, only feet away from the explosion, were left undamaged. Coincidentally enough, both the New Orleans pickup truck and the Las Vegas Cybertruck were rented from Turo, a vehicle sharing service. Also, coincidentally, both men were U.S. Army veterans with an association to Fort Bragg, yes, I'm calling it Fort Bragg, and both men were also American citizens. There is, of course, a political maelstrom around these 2 events separated by only hours. It's worth noting that widespread terrorist attacks have long been predicted based on Biden aggressively opening U.S. borders as widely as possible, with many known and suspected terrorists being identified crossing our open borders. One can only presume that many more made the crossing without being identified. The fact that the 2 men involved in these 2 events were American citizens may seem to run counter to the narrative of foreign terrorists crossing our borders, except, of course, it does nothing of the sort. That America may be able to generate a couple of homegrown terrorists out of our population of under 400 million doesn't mean we need to import extra terrorists out of the world population of almost 9 billion. We have enough terrorists without adding more. Another interesting spin-off of the Jabbar attack in New Orleans was the immediate response of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which sent Assistant Special Agent in Charge, ASAC, Aletha Duncan, to give a curious press statement. Prior to ASAC Duncan, we had the mayor, LaToya Cantrell of New Orleans, characterize this event as a terrorist attack.
Good morning. First of all, we do know that the city of New Orleans was impacted by a terrorist attack.
The mayor was then followed by the cadaver-like New Orleans police chief, Ann Kirkpatrick, who announced that because of the nature of the attack, the FBI would be taking over the investigation.
Because of the nature and the indices that we have on the scene, and we have enough information that the FBI will be taking over this investigation. And with that, I am going to be asking, this is the Assistant Agent in Charge, this is Agent Duncan, Special Agent Duncan, and she has taken over this case on behalf of us and the FBI. As always, we will be in partnership with all of our partners. But Agent Duncan, if you want to have a few words for me.
Thank you, ma'am.
Now, it's noteworthy that the very presence of the FBI at this press conference and the fact that the FBI was taking over the investigation effectively requires that this was a terrorist attack. Otherwise, this would just be a local crime event over which the FBI had no jurisdiction. If there were still any ambiguity on the question of terrorism, Jabbar had attached an ISIS flag to the rear of the pickup truck he drove into the New Year's Eve crowd, and that flag had been photographed by investigators at the scene. Nevertheless, following Major Cantrell's characterization of the attack as an act of terrorism, ASAC Duncan immediately contradicted this position, stating that this was not a terrorist attack.
Good morning. My name is Ellifritz Duncan. I'm the Assistant Special Agent in charge for FBI New Orleans. As Chief Kirkpatrick said, we'll be taking over the investigative lead for this event. This is not a terrorist event.
But then ASAC Duncan immediately proceeded to describe the terroristic-style IEDs that were found associated with the attack. Incidentally, before I play this clip, I feel obliged to note that I don't know just exactly what is wrong with the Federal Bureau of Investigation today. Perhaps it's simply awash in diversity, equity, and inclusion mandates to the exclusion of professionalism. But the agency doesn't do itself any favors when it sends this ASAC forward to speak on its behalf following this horrific New Orleans attack, while she's wearing a nose piercing and appears unable to grammatically speak what I presume is her native language of English.
This is not a terrorist event. What it is right now is their improvised explosive devices that was found.
What it is right now is their improvised explosive devices that was found? Seriously? I would note, folks, that I've lectured at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia, and I've toured the facility on numerous occasions. The Academy has actual studios set up to replicate these public speaking scenarios in order to train their special agents to perform in a polished and professional manner. Undoubtedly, ASAC Duncan has received this training, and yet this is the best she can do? Perhaps incoming FBI Director Kash Patel will have something to say about ASAC Duncan's grotesquely unprofessional manner as he moves to straighten the FBI ship from its current errant course. I simply refuse to believe that the FBI cannot find an African-American female special agent, if they feel they need that particular mix of demographics for some bizarre reason, who can present herself to the public in a professional manner. And if they really can't, somebody in authority needs to be asking why not. In any case, let's circle back to the actual topic of today's show, self-defense against these types of terroristic attacks. The New Orleans drive and shoot attack and the Las Vegas exploding vehicle attack. The drive and shoot attack in New Orleans is really just a variation of a traditional active shooter scenario, and it's distinguishable from the Las Vegas attack in that there is a progression of the attack that allows some opportunity for defensive response. Specifically, first, Jabbar's pickup truck smashes through the crowd until it crashes. Then he emerges from the vehicle with a rifle and starts shooting people. Now, whether you're initially struck by the pickup truck is probably a matter of pure chance. You're either in the wrong place at the wrong time and you're hit, or you're able to avoid being struck. If the former and you're hit, the fight is likely over for you. In the latter case, however, you're theoretically still in the fight. Perhaps you're in a position to see Jabbar crash and disable his vehicle and observe him emerge from his truck with a rifle and initiate the active shooter part of his attack. What can you legally do in that circumstance? It's a particular characteristic of active shooter events that they tend to lack the ambiguity that often shrouds use of force events in uncertainty and hesitation. It's absolutely clear who the bad guy is and what he's doing. He's presenting as an imminent, unlawful, deadly force threat to every innocent person around him. That justifies any of those people or anyone coming to their defense to bring deadly defensive force to bear against Jabbar. And the prospects of facing legal liability for that use of deadly defensive force are about as close to zero as it's possible to get. So if the legal risks of defending against an active shooter like Jabbar approaches zero, does that mean that doing so is risk-free? Well, of course not, because you're now incurring a physical risk. You're in a gunfight. Now, arguably, if you're also at risk from the active shooter, you might get shot. You're in a gunfight whether you like it or not. If you have the option to flee safely and choose to intervene instead, you're in a gunfight now because you chose to be. Now, I don't tell people what to do. I only try to help people make informed decisions. But I would encourage you to think ahead of time about which of those two options, flight or fight, you are prepared to choose in this kind of situation. Whichever you choose, you'll want to execute your choice decisively. Waffling only increases the danger. Indeed, the physical risk you're facing in defending against an active shooter is almost certainly at least double and perhaps triple the physical risk you would be facing in defending against a more traditional armed robbery type of scenario. First, it's likely that you'll find yourself armed with a handgun against an active shooter with a rifle. Here, Jabbar came out of his truck with a rifle, and if you're in a public crowd, it's unlikely you're walking around with a long gun yourself. You probably have your concealed carry pistol if you have any firearm at all. Pistol versus rifle is a winnable fight, but I expect most of us would swap weapons platforms with the bad guy if we had that option. Second, the risk of being shot doesn't come only from the bad guy. Pretty quickly, within seconds, the area is likely to be awash with law enforcement looking to put rounds into a bad guy with a gun. Certainly that's what happened here. If the police turn the corner and see you standing there with a gun in hand, the probability of you getting shot dead by those officers begins to approach 100%. Again, I'm not telling any of you to not intervene in this kind of active shooter event. I don't tell people what to do. But these are the risks you should think on long and hard before you find yourself in this situation in real life to facilitate your ability to act decisively in the moment. Let's turn now to the Las Vegas vehicle explosion attack. This is a rapidly developing investigation that frankly stinks to high heaven. We've learned that suspect Matthew Livelsberger, whose purported corpse was found in the driver's seat of the Cybertruck that exploded, was Special Forces trained, a level of training that makes the largely ineffectual explosive device in the bed of the Cybertruck rather inexplicable. Certainly someone possessing the training of Livelsberger would be capable of making a far more potent improvised explosive device than the one that failed to break the glass on the front doors of the Trump Hotel only feet away. We've also learned that apparently the corpse in the Cybertruck had been fatally shot through the head and was already deceased prior to the explosion itself. Curiouser and curiouser. In any case, I'll leave all the conspiracy theory related facets of this story, and there are plenty of them, to others to wrestle with. Our focus here is on what you can do legally to defend against this type of vehicular IED attack. And to be totally brutal about it, the answer is not much, almost nothing, in fact. Well, not quite. Let me explain. Some years ago, I was an attendee at a talk by Greg Ellifritz. If you don't know Greg and his work, you're doing it wrong. Greg is a former Ohio police officer who's very active as a subject matter expert, trainer, and author on various aspects of self-defense. You can find a great deal of his content at his website, Active Response Training, and activeresponsetraining.net. I'll link to his site in the description to today's show. You should check it out. So I was an attendee at a talk by Greg, and the subject of this particular talk was bombing attacks in public spaces, terrorist IEDs. And while Greg had plenty of good advice, like be aware of out-of-place packages, be aware that if you hear an explosion, there may be another one coming soon, stuff like that, the bottom line was that there's really no use of force defense against an IED attack that catches you unaware, and you'll almost certainly be caught unaware. That's the nature of IED attacks. Much as with the Jabbar pickup truck phase of the New Orleans attack, you're likely either in the wrong place at the wrong time and you're killed or wounded by the bomb, or you're not. If you're killed, well, your problems have become moot. So let's consider the merely wounded and the unwounded scenarios separately. If you're wounded by a bomb, it could well be grievous. Limbs removed, arterial desanguination, bright red jets of your own blood splashing on the pavement. In that moment, you either have a tourniquet on your person and have the presence of mind and training to apply it before you die, or you don't. And if you don't, you die. It's unlikely anyone in the near vicinity is going to have the tourniquet you didn't bring, and even if they did, they're likely applying it to themselves. So while there's really no practical legal self-defense against the detonation of the IED, there are defensive considerations to the consequences of that detonation. Now, if you're watching this show, you probably have an interest in self-defense, and you very likely routinely carry a gun for personal protection. If you're carrying a gun, it's because you've contemplated being in a life or death fight. Life or death fights involve a high risk of serious bodily injury, including life-threatening blood loss. If you don't know how to identify and use a proper tourniquet, you're doing it wrong. If you're not carrying one, and again, I don't tell people what to do, well, at least make sure that's an informed decision. Along the lines of, if anyone nearby has a tourniquet, they probably are applying it to themselves. Well, that's true of you too. Could there be a benefit of having more than one tourniquet? First of all, you may need more than one tourniquet for yourself. You could have been severely wounded in 2 limbs. Second, you're unlikely to be the only person around whose life could be saved by that extra tourniquet. Of course, none of us are likely to be carrying around a dozen tourniquets, but more than one might be something to consider, at least in some higher risk circumstances. Now let's consider the scenario in which you're not personally injured by an IED, but you're aware that others just have been. You heard the explosion, you can hear the screams, and you have at least one tourniquet you don't need yourself, so you rush in to see if you can apply it to save someone's life. One reality to keep in mind with terroristic IED attacks is that it's not uncommon for there to be more than one bomb. A rather traditional strategy, in fact, is to set off an initial bomb to cause random casualties among people in the vicinity, allow time for first responders to flood into the area, and then set off a second bomb to take out the first responders. If you've rushed in to help after an initial explosion, you too would be taken out by a second bomb targeted at responders. Again, I don't tell people what to do, and I'm not telling anyone to not rush to save injured people. I just want you to be making an informed decision. And with that, I'll wrap up today's show, except, of course, to remind all of you on how you can get a free copy of our best-selling book, The Law of Self-Defense Principles, your handbook to being hard to convict if you're ever compelled to use force in defense of yourself, your family, or your property. We translate all the legalese into plain English so you can make better informed, more confident, more legally sound, and more decisive decisions in defense of what you value most. And perhaps best of all, most people tell us they can read the entire book in less than an afternoon. Check the book out on Amazon. It's 5-star rated, but don't buy it there. They'll charge you $25 for the book, plus shipping and handling. Order the book from us, and we only ask that you cover the cost of shipping the book to you. The book itself is free. Grab your free copy of The Law of Self-Defense Principles right now at lawofselfdefense.com/free book. I'll close up by reminding all of you that if you carry a gun so you're hard to kill, that's why I carry a gun, so I'm hard to kill, so my family is hard to kill, then you also owe it to yourself and your family to know the law so you're hard to convict as well. Until next time, I remain Attorney Andrew Branca at lawofselfdefense.com. Stay safe.